手机来试一下，看谁的手机可以看到。我可以换个位置吗？
好，那你就整个，
因为我这边应该就已经好了，然后看你看有没有要调那个，就是这样子应该是就刚看到的。
呀。
哦，这边刚好有，那我也拿家电线好了。
所以，好。照顾他吗？
应该不用照顾了，就放着就好了。我说你现在，
等一下，我看一下，
订阅券。
对。
哎，券还是去？我去装麦克风了。
Do you know the address or the name? I'm waiting for it to start.
Oh, which you should. I know which one.
Or I can do overgrowth and look at the wall there.
Yeah, you see your head. That's your top of your head. Not anymore. And now they can. Yes.
So many people.
First, because I think it started off with one of their portfolio companies, so maybe autonomous wireless charging. So it's like, I think there's production warehouse type settings, something like that. Yeah.
17. Like 2 days. Like 2 days.
Yeah.
Maybe work a bunch of stuff. And all the people like automation and staff. But like on paper, you can just tell you like there's certain
Sweet. Sorry.
I see that. Hey, what's up?
It's up for recording, right? So
Yeah,
this.
that. It's instituted that. The one who's in
Sit in the back.
Okay, so back to that. Okay.
I can't remember now. But I do remember you were actually so they were proud. It was I don't remember how I said it. My argument is like this.
这
，Hello，大家好。我是黄雅欣。很高兴大家今天来到这边，那欢迎大家来。那刚好我们好。就是我们有一个，今天是就是第一场的RadicalxChange台北的活动，那欢迎大家追踪我们的 Twitter。对，那先追踪一下我们的 Twitter 是 RadicalxChange。那大家都有追踪我吗？有没有看到有人拿手机出来？就是我们的，对，我们的这个，现在应该30个人左右。然后我有放了一个直播的链接上去，就是有一个 live stream 收看。有吗？有看到吗？有看到吗？就是 Twitter 上，然后大家可以分享那个 live stream。原本是有一个画面是就是一个 Twitter 的照片，但是现在好像没有看到。好，然后后面有那个茶水跟一些小点心，如果大家想要享用的话，也可以自由享用。对，那感觉大部分的人都来了，所以我们现在先就是 OK 吗？好，那我们就先欢迎 HTC。哦，对，这边。好 ，OK， 那我们先欢迎 HTC 的大长官陈先生，刘陈，为我们说几句话，谢谢。
We put this to the right page. 我讲英文可以吗？还是不然我的中文会你们听不下去。哦，那 Metallic 讲中文好，然后我讲英文 OK。Metallic 可以。Anyways, I'm going to start with welcome. I want to share a story of how I came to this book, Radical Markets. For the previous 4 or 5 years, I've been a venture capitalist based in Hong Kong. We were mainly investing in, I took care of all the deep tech and mostly AI portfolios. We had invested in companies like Siri that got sold to Apple. We invested in DeepMind that got sold to Google. And I was sitting there very cynical. Cynical because I got into this business of venture capital because I wanted to disrupt the big companies. And what happened was we would invest, we would incubate, we would help them, we would develop the business, right? And it just ended up being acquired by the same companies that the whole point was to disrupt. And of course, it all comes down to, many of you understand artificial intelligence and machine learning. In modern machine learning, the only difference, or the biggest difference between companies, is not that much tech difference or algorithmic difference. The biggest difference is data. Right? And data makes all the difference. It's about having lots of data to train these machine learning algorithms, and then you get the best AI that can predict, can recommend, that can manipulate. And so the cynical side of me didn't want to be a part of that business. Although, of course, from a venture capital return and carry side, it was great. And so I left. I started this project called Exodus at HTC. And the thing I'll say about Exodus, which I'll get to later, but I came to the book Radical Markets because of this. Jennifer will talk a lot more about it, about data dignity, right? And the concept that that we had, or I had before coming to this book, is there should be this concept called digital property. When you think about Apple, who talks about privacy, or Facebook talks about privacy. Well, they don't have any credibility on privacy. But Apple, their claim of privacy seems credible. But at the end of the day, there's something more fundamental than privacy, right? Because when Apple says we care about privacy, it's privacy within my walled garden, right? Everything is still in their servers, right? And what bothers me about the internet is there's no conversation about digital property. And there's precedence with this. And the precedence is in the agricultural revolution, what defined it was the definition of real estate property. And then in the Industrial Revolution, what defined and made it flower to create markets was the definition of intellectual property. And what's really, really, really disturbing to me is we're this far down this thing we call the information age, the internet. And there is no concept or conversation or regulation around digital property. None of you in this room, right, including myself and Vitalik, and Audrey for that matter, own our digital identities, own our consumer health data, own any of our search data, our social network, our commerce data, right? And that's what the Exodus is about. The Exodus is about that. We're starting with what Andreas always says: if you don't own your private keys, what? You don't own your Bitcoin, right? And so we're starting with just that foundation: a phone, a hardware wallet that empowers you to own your private keys. And I start with this quote by Nassim Taleb. Do you guys know this author? He wrote books about skin in the game, After Black Swan. I love this tweet because he says, on the Fed level, I'm libertarian, on state or Republican, and friends and family, I'm happy to be a socialist, a communist, right? And of course, the difference, and it's interesting that we're in this cafe called Trust, the difference is trust. Trust depends, of course, and then the size of the group. The amount of trust you give to your friends and family, of course, if you have a good relationship with your friends and family, there's a high level of trust, and hence you'd be open to being a socialist and communist with that group. On the state level is different, and as the group gets bigger and bigger, right, and this is what the whole movement of Bitcoin is about, when a lot of people are cooperating and collaborating on something, there is a lot of incentive for bad behavior, right? And so that's what it's about. It's about trust, right? And when we started, my first time around HTC was 2007, and we thought we were building trust by building the first open source mobile operating system phone, right? And so in 2000 HTC, we shipped the HTC Dream, which is the first Android phone. And we did this because, I think like many of you here, we believe in the promise of the internet, right? Open source software, sharing of knowledge, and at the end of the day, it's about collaboration, right? What happened was this whole movement, the whole Android movement, got hijacked into owning, everybody's data, right? And I think what I find interesting was we launched this Android phone, I think September of 2008. The Bitcoin white paper actually had dropped October of 2008. And so it was only 1 month apart. And why see Bitcoin as the true revolution, or the true kind of heir, or the embodiment of the spirit of open source? And so, and 10 years later, we shipped the first Exodus, which is the first phone that empowers you to own your private keys. Now, like Andrea says, I'm going to skip this. This is kind of our wallpaper, because everything we do is built on open open public blockchains. And this is, of course, the Genesis block. And the thing we do is we're taking that same architecture of owning your private keys, right? Because your private keys, you own your Bitcoin, you own your private keys, you own your Bitcoin, right? And we're taking that same architecture to start empowering you to own your identity, right? To start owning your data. That architecture, of course, people call it the decentralized web or Web 3.0. That's the architecture we're building. Empower you to use your private keys. We want to start working with developers for you to use our SDK to build applications that empower people to own their identities, data, and then we have examples that we can show later on our integration with third-party dApps, with browsers like Opera, other DeFis where people are signing in with their private keys, for example. So it's the first time, for example, you're not signing in with your Google ID or your Facebook ID, you're signing in with your private keys, which is the first time you start owning your ID. And so these are the four main things we're doing. Own your own keys, and of course the next question then becomes, what happens when you lose your phone, right? So we have something called social key recovery. And social key recovery, which we also open source, I'll send you a link on GitHub, is a system is when you get your phone, you set up your private keys. We'll split your keys into 5 parts. You share with 5 of your friends and family. So when you lose your phone, you can recover it through your friends and family. You can't keep us, right? Because that was defeat the whole purpose if we had a copy of the keys. And then you can use our hardware to sign transactions. We have a key management API. We call it the Zion Vault. There is also an SDK on GitHub that we'll share with you. The final thing is the latest thing with the Exodus, which the next Exodus, which is launching in October, to help secure the network. So the next Exodus one has, or even the Exodus as well, will be able to run full Bitcoin nodes. I'm not going to explain why that's important. And thanks to Vitalik, right? That Vitalik was a big fan of social key recovery, and then he also tweeted with Glenn Weil on, hey, this might be the first early step towards formalized non-state backed identity. And we're still working on that. We're still working on what's the best decentralized identity system to use moving forward. This is our GitHub for the Zion Vault. If you want to play around building third-party dApps using the security of our hardware. Let's skip this video. I want to go back to this, and this is our social key recovery GitHub as well. And so, yeah, I'm going to end there. Please just visit our website, htcexodus.com. And I'm excited with hosting this Radical Markets because there are 2 things that we share. One, of course, is data dignity. We care about people's data. We think that people should own their data. And then, whatever, only from that ownership can you decide if you want to sell it, if you want to give it up for free, but there, at least architecture-wise, you need to own it first. And the second thing, which I was in conversation with Audrey last time, was experimenting with the concept of quadratic loading, which Jennifer will talk about. But given our hardware texture that allows you to own your private keys, of course, you own those tokens. It's the fundamental infrastructure, the hardware layer, to start implementing secure quadratic loading methods. So I'm going to turn the floor back to Jennifer, correct? Or not she first. So thank you. That's.
So this event wouldn't be possible without HTC's help. 因为 HTC 这个是我们重要的赞助，然后也非常支持我们社群，然后这个场地也是 HTC Exodus 的 Lisa 后面那位非常低调的小姐，Lisa 来帮我们协助，然后安排，然后就是整个还帮我们排椅子，然后整个 set up 起来，然后我们也非常感谢我们摄影师，就是我特别的请来的，就是从新竹来对。这个交大职工，对，就是他毕业之后，然后他就特别过来这样，然后也非常感谢金堂朋友今天来参加活动，讲几话吗？然后谢谢 Vitaly 过来参加，他今天早上是去那个Technologies 有一个巴德路上有一个实体店开幕，他去参加这个记者会，然后听说是都用中文讲。所以大家可以去听一下，就是比他非常有趣的中文，然后这边也有就是那个 Oscar from 这边，然后还有我们 Radical 非常支持我们那个宝博士，对，宝博士也在这边，就是他翻译非常多 Radical 有 market 有关的文章，然后还有Jennifer CEO Foundation 基金会执行摆在这边。那我想大家应该就想要继续吧。然后我们就是先请志成来帮我们介绍一下书，然后再来就请 Jennifer， 然后再来我们就有一个 Q&A session， 然后再一个小小的休息时间一个 break， 然后看有没有想要讲的。接下来就是李才会讲。好，那我们先请志成。志成是那个先介绍一下，怕有些人不知道，因为感觉是新面孔，就是他是台北以太坊社群的重要的组织者，就是 co-organizer of Taipei Ethereum community, and he's also with the Ethereum Foundation research team， 就是他也是以太坊基金会的研究员，对，然后他会帮我们来介绍，那请大家鼓掌欢迎他。
好，谢谢雅信。我今天最重要的任务呢，就是确定大家买得到书。然后所以如果大家读英文版的话呢，可以到这 Amazon 买这一本，然后因为英文版也要出第二刷，然后大概在10月份出来。那如果要买 Kindle 的话，记得要这个就是在那个搜寻吧搜寻那个白色那一本书才买得到。然后下一然后简体中文版的书已经出来了，然后预计7月底出货。然后陈保罗在后面，他现在开了一个想要开团购，那如果大家想要团购这一本的呢，可以会后去找陈保罗。先搁下一页。然后好消息是繁体中文版的明年会出来，是八旗出版社发行的。最后就是这是一张小抄，然后简单的就是把一些每一章的一些重点这样一句话摘要下来。那我觉得最主要整个Radical 它可以跟台湾其实中华民国非常有关系，因为如果就是当初这个Radical 的这个思想家 Henry George， 然后他影响很多人，那包括就是我们的伟大的国父孙中山先生在写这个三民主义的时候呢，然后也这个土地改革里面呢也是有这个就是 Henry George 的思想。那第一章呢主要有一个这个哈伯格税，但是等一下就Vitaly会详细的介绍它。然后第二章呢，是介绍一个叫平方投票的东西，然后就是我们在总统杯的黑客松，然后有实验这样子，然后等一下他们会讲吗？ 有时间 ，OK， 好，我有多一点时间。然后后面就是3个，其实都是针对就是不同的财产权的重新设计。那第一个是签证，然后第二个是就是大基金，然后最后面是关于资料这样子。然后我就讲到这边，然后最后一页就是大家follow Twitter 这样子，然后去获取新的资讯，谢谢。
那我们可以谢谢志成，可以请唐过来讲一下那个 RadicalxChange 吗？对，可以。那我们回到上面，因为既然志成都 Q，
好，谢谢。没有人跟我说我要讲一下好了。OK， 其实那个第一个 cost 就是哈佛的税，如果感兴趣的话，就是最近很红的那个平均地权条例，在设计出来之后就是照价征税、照价征收等等。但是大家都知道说这个书里面为它在做了一个新的一个 push， 就是说任何人都可以买，不是只有政府可以买。因为如果只有政府可以买的话，那其实对于需要付哈伯格税的人，他其实就可以去影响政府，让政府不买。那这样的话，还是这个地价税的用处就有限。相信最近大家都有看到讨论。但是哈伯格税如果现在是每一个人都可以买的话，那市场就一定会有效率。那在QV 其实是一个非常简单的概念。如果大家有看过总统杯黑客松的话，我们每年都大概有100多个提案。那这个提案呢，100个到20个的这个阶段是非常重要的，因为当你成为前20队的时候，我们就会用尽一切力气，去让你拿到你想要拿到的资料，去修改这个或甚至调整法规，去把每一个团队所需要的，不管技术上的、法规上面或者是领域上面的专家都凑起来，然后让这个idea 有3个月的时间能够把它做到。那当然在 demo day 之后，这20队最后会剩下5队，那这5队就是蔡英文总统，这个就算他最近就是去纽约这个拼外交，但是他说我们的那个颁奖典礼要延后1个礼拜，因为他一定要亲自颁哈，一定要亲自颁给那5位朋友。那这5个队伍其实就会收到一个奖杯，那这个奖杯是没有奖金的，这跟一般黑客松不太一样。但是这个奖杯是一台投影机，那这台投影机只要一打开，就会投影出总统颁奖给你的画面。那因为每队里面，就像我说的，一定有 domain 的专家，一定有技术的专家，跟一定有公务员嘛。那公务员我没有办法颁奖金，但是如果公务员他的上司不让他做这样一个 project， 他只要把总统投影出来，这个在台湾我们叫神主牌哈，只要把神主牌投影出来，他的上司就这个非做不可的。也就是说，每年我们颁这5个奖杯，讲的就是说，在最近3个月里面，他不管做了任何事情，在接下来1年里面，我们都会用尽一切方法，让他的这个想法变成我们的政策的一部分。那所以这个呢，其实是如果你是公部门创新的话，这个是没有什么比这个奖品更好的，因为就是你的 idea 就是国家帮你养嘛，最近这个很流行啊，可能已经退流行了。那 anyway， 那所以呢，我们怎么样从100个提案变成20个提案呢？这里面就是 QV 进场的时候了，因为我们之前看到很多要网友进来投票的一些网站，好比像说身份证再设计啦，都有一个问题，就是说你一进来的时候，它是按照票数排序，所以你只看到最红的那2个。然后接下来呢就会灌票，所以不管一个人1天3票还是5票还是几票，那所有人都会一直去灌一个，然后其他的都完全没有看。那这个时候等到就是实际得奖那个出来的时候，大家都会觉得被欺骗感情嘛，这个大家都知道。所以在这个情况下，我们希望看到的就是2个 property， 一个是说大家不会一窝蜂的跟风的投票，那第二个说大家会愿意透过一个机制设计 mechanism design 去确保说大家愿意把这100多个提案里面至少多看过几个再来投，所以我们就用了新发明的这个 QV。那 QV 这个想法非常简单，就每个人一登录之后都会有99个 point， 就99个点数。那你如果这100多个案子里面想要支持某一个，你只需要花1点就可以投他1票。但如果你想要投他2票的话，加起来要花4点。那你要9点才能够投到3票，16点才能够投到4票。这是为什么它叫平方投票法？所以当你有99点的时候，你全部灌下去，你只能灌9票，而且你还没有投完，因为那只用81点，对不对？你还剩18点，那你剩18点就会必须要去再看一个，然后去灌4票，灌4票你又还剩2点，所以你会必须，因为你不想浪费票嘛，所以就会想要再去看另外2个，然后各配置它1点。可是呢，当你看到那2个的时候，你会发现说，哎，这个说不定比本来你那个灌9票的还要好，所以你就会把那9票稍微收一点回来，然后去灌其他票。那这就让大家去找到 synergy， 就是这100个提案里面哪些是具有这个共同的利益。那你同时让这2个上，比你只让其中1个上好，就是配票了。那透过机制设计，大家既不会浪费自己的票去投这个，就是全部灌在一个其实你没有那么强烈的爱好的 也不会浪费你的票再投一大堆就是你听都没有听过的。如果你只懂某个 domain 的话，那你大概就会去投那几个 domain 的票。那就是透过数学方法 domain while 去证明说，这其实在某些条件满足的情况下是最好的，诱使大家会把真实的偏好去表现出来的。因为你每一票的这个边际成本刚好等于它的边际效用。那这个大概就是 QB 的设计。那我们实际上全部的投票，在匿名化之后都已经放到 GitHub 上面了，在我们 PDS 的 GitHub。那在这个投票的前端也都是open source 出来。那我们大概2000多人投票。那真的是完全没有换票的情况。那在这个中间，就算大家是看不到彼此投的票，因为我们是秘密投票，是最后跟评审一起开票，连评审都没有办法先看到大家的投票哈。但是我们最后做出来的这个前20名，确实是比上一届的综合媒体从前20名完全是靠评审做出来的，更 balance 更平衡，然后更能够反映大家具体的需要。所以我觉得这次 QB 的实验还算是蛮成功的。以上，谢谢。
那我们可以很快速的听我讲一下吗？因为我们有很非常重要的外面。
Right, so what I've just recapped is our use of projectic voting in the presidential hackathon, which you can find all the details in blog.pdis or TW anyway. But what we have introduced is that in the previous year's hackathon, what we've done is that we asked 10 judges to basically select 20 teams out of 100 teams. However, that tends to reflect the tendency of the judges to basically have a follow the crowd effect in a kind of small circle. But this time, for the first time, we opened up 30% of the entire scoring mechanism for people who have the SMS and email authentication to allocate 99 points, which is 99 rather than 100 as in Colorado, because then people won't even have the possibility of just going there and voting everything on the same project, right? And so after voting for 9 votes, which spends 81 points, you still have some like 18 left. So people will get motivated to look across the board to find the synergies and the teams that are working closely with each other. And so I'm very happy to hear that aside from the Colorado code base and our QB code base, that HTC Exodus may be implementing something that's supporting a strong voting identification capability for future QBs. So as director of the board of RadicalxChange, we just proposed a movement that maybe we do our board decisions using a QB round, and after it to ratify it using a more legal way. And I think that proves both the success of the QB in a more public setting, which we don't really know who will come, as opposed to Colorado, because everybody knows everybody here, right? So this is both resistance against people who are just randomly and even have a motivation to just hijack the QB, and we prove that with the right interface design, we can just minimize that kind of trolling, as well as we see with the numbers published to the GitHub, people really do consider more than 1 or more than 2 cases instead of voting for 9 votes and then just immediately rage quitting. They actually look through all the different cases and really voted synergistically. So I think it's a pretty good experiment. Thank you.
So now please join me in welcoming Jennifer from RadicalxChange. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Audrey, for that recap in English. Am I going to be pressing? Okay, so should I stand over here? So I'm Jennifer Monroe. I'm the CEO of RadicalxChange Foundation, which began shortly after, are you ready over there? Okay, shortly after the RadicalxChange book came out. I'm going to just go over a bit of the background, my background as well, our mission, methods, values, the foundation, because it started as a movement and now it's progressed also to have a foundation that we now are lucky to have Audrey and Vitalik on the board. How it's been in the world now, like with the Colorado example, and the kind of world we want to build for tomorrow. So a little background about me, I'm an artist, and I came to RadicalxChange a bit in a roundabout way. I've been working in the data area since 2013, and as an artistic gesture, as a protest to Snowden's revelations about the data exploitation, as I saw it. I decided to become a corporation as a way to announce the value of data and as a way to try and take control of it and see if I could own it as intellectual property. So I created a legal container with which to say, I put everything there. That doesn't mean you can actually go and stop it from being collected, but I could theoretically go and sue the companies collecting it. But it was more of to make a big protest and a message. But at the time I was looking at, you can't see this, but just all the ways that data came from the person, because companies were looking at all the devices that we use and the ways that they could vacuum up data, but I wanted to see where did I generate it and where did it go. And then eventually I was thinking, how can we go from this technological hyper-capitalism to a technological socialism of sorts. And so this is like where everybody's in a corporation collecting their data and protecting it, and then cooperative data broker was what I was trying to push the conversation towards. So the market was what I was interested in, the economic value, that everybody was looking at the privacy, which is very important, but I saw for the first time there's something we're all contributing to, we all create value, but we're completely not participating in the market. So in 2018, I was doing some research about any data union starting, and I came across Glenn's work, actually. And we had both at that time been interviewed for this Economist article, and at the beginning, because at the beginning of that video, that was a screenshot, I said, "We are all data slaves." And so this is where the collaboration between Glenn and I started. And quickly, he was having a lot of success from Radical Markets' book. So he was going all over, he was starting to work with governments, a lot of startups were forming, and he was giving talks about the book. So there was much more attention than they thought. So we quickly formed a group. There were only a handful of us at the time, and we became the board. We said we wanted to set up different tracks because we wanted to be really interdisciplinary. So we had Mamie Reingold, who organizes DevCon for entrepreneurship and tech. Mark Luter was activism in government. We have Avital Baldwin and Charlie Thompson, who did a lot of work at the very, very start with Glenn. Ananya Chakravarti, who's ideas and research. She's a professor at Georgetown. Myself for activism in government, arts and communication. Matt Pruitt, who is the deputy executive director and Jeff Lee Yaw as the executive director at the time. And so we set out to try and define what this was going to be. And we said we're a community committed to imagining alternative visions for a humane and equitable future by harnessing the emancipatory potential of insights from mechanism design in dialogue with a range of other academic fields, being the communicative imagination of artists, the pragmatic ingenuity of entrepreneurs, and the idealism of activists, as well as the rigor of academics. So we went about to say, okay, what kind of future do we believe in? And we said it's one where power rests in diverse and emergent democratic organizations. And we wanted to challenge basic inherited institutions by building better ones and modernizing them, increasing public knowledge about the emancipatory potential of new designs and mechanism design, and evolving our vision from the bottom up. We didn't want this top-down approach that we, as this organizing central body of RadicalxChange, would tell you what to do, but we wanted to facilitate the ideas being pushed forward and coming up to where they could actually move on to making change. And we were coming from all North America, so we said replacing capitalism, but we can also say just stale institutions in general from within by developing the ideas, communities, and organizations that practice fair and more efficient forms of organization. So not just protesting and saying we want something different. We're willing to work within what exists already to make the change. So roading, we say.
And there are core values that we espouse. Openness seeks for free exchange of ideas in an environment that is tolerant, respectful, and neutral in a way. Like not, we kind of hold our politics aside and are inclusive with everybody. To a certain limit, I guess. Egalitarian. We're animated by the belief that hyper-concentrations of wealth are not natural or efficient, and that more genuinely competitive market systems would result in a broader distribution of wealth. Dignity. Every person's well-being, financial or otherwise, is a good in itself, and we want our work to reflect that. And social innovation. At RadicalxChange, we embrace the challenge of overturning stale categories and assumptions, and we believe that innovation can help build a better social institutions like Exodus, for example. We have governing principles. I could share this slide deck with everybody, but it's be responsible, have accountability for what you do. Diversity, don't just try and stay within your own discipline or close disciplines, but really be inclusive of if you're a technologist, artist, people in activism, academia, like really mix it up. Decentralization, we're working fully decentralized, and it's challenging at times with time differences, but it's also really kind of brings the world a lot smaller, and you see there are a lot less differences than we thought, and that there's power, there's like pushing decision-making outwards as well. And respect, which is kind of goes with responsibility, respect each other as equals, social equals, and empathize with the intellectual and personal perspective of every member of the community. And this is a social justice mission. It's not that we expect to last forever. If we do our job right, we don't exist in a number of, like 10, 20 years. We want to see change. We don't want to get enriched by this. So, as was discussed, the ideas that we started working with are from the book, Radical Markets. Property is monopoly with cost, radical democracy with quadratic voting, dismembering the octopus, which doesn't really have a mechanism, an acronym, but it's about antitrust. Uniting the World's Workers is the VIP program, and Data as Labor, which we've, because of some difficulty with that language, we prefer to call it data dignity instead, which we think is more encompassing. So, the ideas come from, where is it? Yeah, the same. In the last talk, were the topics covered? A little bit? So it's like been described, or should I go into that? Okay. So, you already have seen Henry George, which is the wrong way around, and Sun Yat-sen. But then also Hannah Arendt, and William Vickrey. So Vickrey is the kind of father of auctions, in the way that Glenn was inspired by. And Hannah Arendt is a very wonderful political philosopher, but I like to point out how she considered labor, and that espouses a bit better, expresses a bit better how we describe it when we say data as labor. So when you see that, and she said that we've combined labor and work to be the same thing, when in fact they should be separate. When you give birth, you're giving labor. There's different kinds of labor that are just expression, they're activities of human life, and so that's when we say data as labor. That's what we're talking about. So last March, we, quickly after all coming together, we said, okay, well, let's bring even more people together and see how many people are really interested in thinking about these ideas. Already we knew a number were, but we wanted to really convene everybody at this time. So we, in March, put on a conference for about 450 people. Vitalik came and spoke. And some of the other wonderful people that we had were like Margaret Levy talking about expanding the community of faith, which is thinking about people not just in your own community, say like she described labor unions of before, and said that they grew this community of faith, thinking like these people are like you in certain ways, and that now in this globalized world we have to expand that to think about people far away but in similar situations. And we did this with like 80 volunteers. We put on this big conference, and it was pretty amazing to have this group come together, give a lot of time, and then also from very different disciplines, very different backgrounds, all over the world. And we saw that as well with the people that came. And you had people from politics listening to an artist talk, not having any clue that it was an artist talk. Things like that. And there was a lot of respect as well. It was not, everybody was just very tolerant, very open with each other, so it grasped the ideals that we had. And so at the end of the conference, we announced a change in leadership. Glenn didn't want this to become about him and just about radical markets. It was about pushing the ideas forward. And so myself and Matthew Pruitt have stepped into those positions of executive branch, I guess. So Matthew is the president and I'm the CEO. And we've been reorganizing the RadicalxChange Foundation. So the board, we have Audrey and Vitalik, Glenn is still on the board, myself as well. Mark Luter is still on the board, but we also have Daniel Allen, who's a political theorist, and Mamie Reingold. And Matt and I are in the executive branch, and then functional people like financial, treasurer, media. As a chapter, you're going to communicate with Emmanuel Midi, or if anybody wants to set up another chapter, that's our community director. And Matt Mazurka, who's like a tech person, and anybody that wants to participate will likely work with him. And then we have advisors. So we had the tracks before, but now we have this advisory leadership for each of the tracks because we were finding that they were getting siloed, and we wanted them to work together. We also wanted the projects that develop to have all of their involvement when wanted, instead of them coming up with just independent projects. Sometimes that happens, but that all of the interdisciplinary nature goes into everything that's done. So the art, and we're changing it to environment because that was another thing that was drastically missing, and it's probably the most crucial, critical question, issue of our time, of our shared future. So this includes artists, filmmakers, architects, creative writers, long-form journalists, educators, musicians, entertainers, web designers, game makers, virtual reality experience creators, and you can go on whatever that means to you in art and environment or culture and environment. Entrepreneurship and technology includes entrepreneurs, technologists, engineers, developers, executive investors, all for-profit business leaders and employees, and of course blockchain community members. Ideas and research is academics, public intellectuals, bloggers, researchers, members of think tanks, non-fiction book authors, because often they're almost like historians. There's a lot of rigor that goes into their work. And literary critics. Activism in government includes politicians, policymakers, government bureaucrats, nonprofit sector workers, labor unions, political campaigns and parties, lobbyists, social media stars, because they are, I guess they could be called entertainment, but they also are influencers, so it's some like activism in some way, more on the political side. and short-form journalists. So our mission now, we've kind of reworked this because we want it to be a bit clearer, is RadicalxChange exists to cultivate values, open minds, and seed ideas for those eager to transcend traditional categories with a focus on reforming our institutions. And we do this through inspiring and educating, connecting, and convening. And we want to build markets and technologies true to the richness of our diversely shared lives. So that's a little tagline that we use. So some examples of what we're doing in the different categories that I just said. So the inspire and educate, that's mostly content generation, particularly for communities like this and chapters around the world, and also people in leading positions like government, politicians, mayors, particularly local government. So we're putting together a handbook of the RadicalxChange ideas. We're also developing a course curriculum for people to really grasp them, the ideas. We're also scheduling, curating, and publishing some generated research about RadicalxChange ideas. And we're also developing visual arts, other content, explainer videos, and also things like exhibitions, a variety of interactive work to make it more accessible. And we're thinking of doing a media channel, and we'll probably start doing podcasts. And then the Connect is more about research and advisory matchmaking. So it's like finding the people, say if we have a local government, and they want to start using quadratic voting, or if they want to form, talk a little bit about the data, how we see it in a moment, form a MID, I'll get back to that, then they might come to us and say, okay, put together a group for me, this is one of the ways that we would matchmake and say, okay, this group will do the research and then figure out how best to implement it, maybe even build the system that you need. But to also understand all the caveats and so forth. So we're also doing in this category where we connect researchers for papers around RadicalxChange ideas. As I said, exposing work to policymakers and entrepreneurs as well. Launch peer review academic journal. This is something Ananya is working to build a foundation for, which would disrupt the very hierarchical and very hard to penetrate world of peer review publishing through academia. So a lot of people do labor by peer reviewing and they don't get their names on it, and you always get this professor that's been in the system, hardly ever sometimes even puts an I or pen to the key to the paper that still kind of dominates that market in a way. Matchmaking startups with social scientists, technologists, and artists. Matchmaking policymakers with researchers and those with government activism experience. And then community building with convening. That's what we mean. Holding this annual conference and gatherings, open calls, hackathons, ways to really get ideas all together, and especially from the community, not just from the RadicalxChange Foundation. Seeking out chapter leads for new regions, developing chapter meetup programs, content, rules, and guidelines, and developing and nurturing processes for information sharing across chapters. Like I said, that bottom up, and we're building an infrastructure to facilitate that, as well as cross-pollination between the chapters. So this is an example of the Inspire and Educate, me going around and the chapters having, giving talks, presenting the ideas. This was to a data law group in Shanghai. And this is a chapter playing Monopoly. So presentations, this is where we're at right now. Games, content for chapters. The connecting, we worked with, we put Democracy Now! Have you heard of Santiago Siri, of course? So he developed the interface for the Colorado quadratic voting I don't want to say experiment, implementation. And then, Gavin Newsom announced that he wants to have a data dividend. He didn't know explicitly what that would entail. Advising him on that would be an example of connecting. And then recently, a group went together, including Vitalik, to Canada to present all of the ideas to the government, the parliament, and they sound pretty excited to implement them and put themselves out of work. And then the convening, these are some images from the conference. We had Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Chile Thurston, who wrote, he's been promoting his new tech manifesto, which is one of these people that would be great if you're working on data dignity in a new way to have involved in thinking about that ethically. And so this is a chapter now, right, Yasin?
Yeah.
So you're one of 150, and like that's what we want. We want that connection, and not us in the middle. We're trying to support in many different ways, but that it's really about the ideas that come from everybody in this community. And also about really pushing the ideas forward, not sticking with quadratic voting as it is. Like Audrey said, testing it in different ways. We've been asked to work with Oxfam in Kenya to try and find ways to get better gender equality in voting. So there might be 3 iterations that they're going to test out to figure out what actually comes with the best outcome. And then also a way of protecting the data of vulnerable peoples in that environment as well. There's some new ones that have been coming up. You could probably, I don't know if Vitalik would be better suited to talk about quadratic finance than me, and then a very new one that's not out yet, quadratic consumption. But no pressure, you don't have to. But it's a different way of funding public goods, and so that it's not all isolated to very specific projects. So I'm going to pass it off to Vitalik in a moment. I just want you to remember the core values, the governing principles. Yasin, do I have time to talk a bit about data?
Yeah.
The data? Okay. So this is a bit in speaking to Phil's talk. So I agree with you about the ownership of data, but at the same time, when we think about it, I think the semantics is getting a bit confusing in a way, because when you say you own something, that means that if I sell it to you, I have no control over it anymore. So I'm kind of curious about how that works with the Exodus phone. When you say ownership, how does it get transferred? But what we're interested in pushing in the data dignity world, or data as labor, what we're researching is identity in this digital economy. What is that? What does data dignity mean with personal data? And forging new political identities to combat polarization and radicalization, identity in plural societies, labor movements for the digital economy, challenging methodological and political individualism, imagining decentralized and horizontal modes of community organization. So that's the kind of research that's happening at the academic level. Some of the ways that we are thinking about it, one is, that's quite new, is that data isn't always individual. My mother's birthday is also her birthday. The fact that we're all here, our location data is the same. It says a lot more about what's happening than just you being in that place. And then there's also more value. Also with health data, that's really important to think about drug treatments, improving things, and that intersectionality. If you have a genetic mutation, your sibling has the same, and your other sibling might have the same. It's the exact same mutation usually. So what that can say a lot more than just that's information about the individual. So we are espousing a couple of ideas. We're advocating for a couple of ideas. One is something that we call a MID, mediators of individual data. And so right now you have sorry I don't have a slide for it, I thought I left it in, but it's gone. You have the companies that sit in the middle, you have the users, we know this structure, and then you have kind of like this. So this is, you don't have that. You have, that's a company, and then there's a market, right? So we're basically saying that if that were a MID, a mediator of individual data, but that there were lots of different MIDs, or call them cooperatives, call them data unions, call them nonprofit organizations. So this is something that we're trying to advocate and see happen, and working with companies to do that, working with at the legislative level, at the policy-making level, to push for that to happen. But basically that these organizations would have to be fiduciaries, meaning that they operate in your best interest, not in their best interest, and not in their other partner's best interest. That they have to, this is the one that, they're nonprofit, that 70 to 80% of the value that they earn goes to the members of that community. And that can also be, the value can be transferred to services, say like, doesn't everybody want free healthcare? Isn't that a great goal to try and achieve? So these are where we're going with MIDs, also the longevity of them, that they would be more natural, lifelong, not indefinite length, not living forever, but maybe a bit longer than a human's lifetime. And there are a few other principles, but so this is one thing that we encourage you to think about, maybe think about forming. I'm also curious to hear if anybody has been thinking along the same lines, and also with Exodus, if there's the potential to have the data go to something that basically frees up the information to the market as well as to better quality data. I think that's it. Yeah.
We'll move on to the Q&A session, and then Phil has something to say.
I just want to pose a few questions about digital property. Right. The first thing I want to say is I want to start back with Bitcoin again. Right. Bitcoin, the top characteristics. It's open, it's neutral, it's censorship resistant, it's borderless. I want to talk about this thing called borderless. Right. Borderless means that this money can transfer across borders, meaning nation borders. But it's borderless, right? Right now, fiat currency, when it goes from one country to a different country, it's heavily taxed. There's transaction costs, there's regulation costs. You need lawyers and accountants to do KYC, to set up bank accounts, right? And so the concept of digital property becomes very, especially because of the cloud infrastructure today. Our data is in some server, right? A lot of our data is in Facebook, the search data in Google. Of course, this idea of the Westphalian, and when I say Westphalian, is this construct of nation states. This idea of nation states do not apply to this type of architecture anymore. And if you think about the way Web 2.0 server client architecture, where your data lies, if you really think about it, the nation-state borders don't make any sense. And in that sense, I think what you're saying is and I agree, is we do have to rethink what our personal digital data is. How do you define those borders? And the thing you call MIDS, we have this concept in our studies. We've come down to what we call it data trusts. We found that the best legal structure around guardianship of your data, and the way we think about it is there will be many, many data trusts. So one data trust will own and govern, not own. There will be stewards of your health data, for example. Another data trust would be stewards of your social graph. Another would be a steward of your search data, right? And so there'll be many, many, of these data trusts. Of course, that's a decentralized structure, which then goes back to what I said in the beginning. The more and more people that collaborate, the more trust that we need. But most importantly, how do you set up these incentives and these systems that promote good behavior rather than that? And so far from what we've seen, the best legal structure and regulation around this is from the trusts. And so I do want to pose this question, and I want to pose a suggestion to the crowd to look into the language, the legality around trusts, because it does have precedence that exists, and I think data trust is as close to your concept of MIDS as possible.
So now we'll have the Q&A session, and anyone have any questions for Jennifer or for Phil or for Chih-Cheng? Yeah.
So when you were talking earlier about the need, you had, so is there like a reverse Facebook where Facebook is actually acting for the good of everyone?
No, it would basically force them to have to be the purchasers only, not sellers, not traders of data. So they could still act, not in people's pictures. Maybe I misunderstood the question.
So the need actually purchases the data?
Well, that's an example of like what needs to be worked out. So that's what I mean. That's with the chapters, with us going to actually work within local, like say with California, or even if Google or Facebook were to come to us and say, okay, we sign on to your idea, how do we do that? Figuring out that structure. So if here might be the best form, might be a trust, maybe somewhere else that doesn't exist or that's not allowed. It's different for every place, but maybe a trust is the best. But what would create the most protections for the individual? So the exact mechanism for it is still to be determined, because if you have to change, if the only way to do it is really actually to change policy to stop Facebook from selling the data, or if you have, you make it so that Facebook still doesn't sell the data but still collects it, and that you get it from them, and you just make it so that they cannot sell it. That's still a policy level imposement. So that's what we think chapters and all the very bright people working on these ideas are pushing forward. Figure out the best way. So we don't have, we have like, this would work great in this scenario, and there's this kind of scenario, but making the players participate and play the right game is the difficult thing right now. So I don't have an answer for that.
有问题吗？还可以提问，现在是提问时间 Q&A session right now.
I guess I just like ask if Bill could kind of address if there's anything from the hardware perspective of getting the players to play. Because in a sense, ownership is more of a legal term as opposed to something technology can solve. Technology can solve if people can have access to the data and if it's private to you or other people can see it. So I'm really curious to address the question that you asked.
Vitalik, you might be able to say more on the blockchain technological aspect. He's asking about the technology of data and identity. And
yeah, I mean, you raised the question just now about that the players are playing very nicely, and so there's a difference between ownership and a difference between privacy and a difference between who can see it. So how do all these things come together?
Data is like the concept of ownership was basically intended to deal with physical objects, and data is very different from physical objects because a physical object is controlled by one person, whereas data can be controlled from anywhere from 0 people all the way up to all of humanity. And so what we're really talking about is like who has access under what terms. So there's really a lot of different ways to try to make that decision. And there's a lot of technological approaches that can get that can make a lot of the different possibilities happen. And some of the research that we're doing here around cryptography can help make some of these data market approaches work better, for example. There's definitely lots of things we can do.
Any other questions? 有看见那边还是？有啊，没有啊？
就刚刚看到有很多人举手，怎么现在突然都不见了？有吗？最后2题吗？好 ，OK。
May I ask a boring question? So I wonder if there's any solid analysis for those mechanisms. I mean, why is quadratic voting rather than a cube or maybe the power of 1.5? Are you for?
Yeah, so the one sentence reason why quadratic voting is great is because the derivative of the x squared function is 2x, so it's proportional to x, and so the idea is that it's kind of like your first vote costs 1, your second vote costs 2, your third vote costs 3, and so forth. And so if you're willing to, like, if you value something twice as much, then you'll be willing to keep voting until one vote costs twice as much, and so if you value something twice as much, you'll make twice as many votes. And so that basically means that quadratic voting kind of properly adds up how much people care about something. But there's also, like, Glenn has a lot more complex reasoning of like how it applies to real world edge cases and so forth. So I encourage you to further.
One last question. So
Thank you. So I'm currently a PhD researcher, and I'm currently studying stuff about self-sovereign identity. So I was wondering if the organization has so far has any interesting project on that. Self-sovereign identity, yes. Something related to the decentralized identity.
it's going there, but not specifically that I'm aware of. But there might be people researching. That's, I'm not in every single track. I don't have an oversee of everything all the time. So I'm sure there's somebody working on it that is in the community. Yeah.
That we're both really
Yeah.
since TCX activist trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but I can't say the names
Can
or
I
any
answer the
specific
question?
projects.
Yeah, you can answer.
Okay, this is how I think about identity. Again, I want to go back to Bitcoin. Okay. Again, it addresses the property, right? Bitcoin, when you own your private keys, you own your Bitcoin, right? Can we all agree that when you own your private keys, you own your Bitcoin? So that's property. Your Bitcoin is your property, right? So that same architecture you can use to build an identity that you own, right? No bank, no school, no institution, no nation can say you do or don't own this. You own it, right? And so the way we think about a decentralized identity, and this is where you have to start. You have to start with BTC, to Bitcoin, right? So we work with somebody with Christopher Allen, something called BTCR. And the way we think about, and then you'll, of course, the banks and government will ask, okay, so what about KYC, right? And so this is how I think about it. I think at the core, you own your own identity, right? You say who you are regardless what other people say who you are or what you are, right? Regardless if this company, or HTC or not, or a government says you are a citizen of Taiwan, you are an employee of HTC, or you go to so-and-so school, right? At the core, you need something that you own, that's stateless, that's nationless, that's corporate-less, right? Now, if you start to want to, I don't know, get health benefits from the state, sure, you need to get, or a driver license, sure, you need some nation or some third party to do KYC or to certify you, right? You go to a school, you got an electrical engineering degree, you get a certificate. That should be part of your identity. But that identity is a different layer on the stack of what you own or what you don't own. At the core, again, it's this identity that you own, that no institution. But on top of that, you can build identifiers. So a school can give you a certificate based on this thing that you own to certify you. You have a double E degree, right? A company on top of that or beside of that can say, yes, you are an HTC employee, right? Audrey, on the other hand, can say, yeah, you are a citizen of Taiwan, right? And those are permissioned blockchains, right? What we want to start with are these, I think it has to start with these open blockchains. Then we can start building permissioned stuff. If we still latch on to these, I think, outdated nation-state definitions. So that's my answer.
Okay, I just wanted to add a philosophical note here. Look, like you're not a single identity in a way. You're made up of all of your different networks or communities. So what exactly do you mean by sovereign identity? It's on the technological side, but in a philosophical sense.
People mean different things by the word identity. So like some of the things that people mean, like one of them is just I did something and was identified as an actor that did this, and I want to prove that when I'm doing some other thing that I'm also the same actor as the actor who did this thing. So it says you want to prove that you are, and I'm going to prove that. And things like watching these widgets and so forth kind of fall into that. Another use case of identity is this concept of attestations, which is that basically says I assert that I know some specific thing about this other identity. And then a third use case that people care about is basically identifying unique humans or things like voting and anti-collusion and so forth, for example. So like we use one word to refer to all of them, but once you start trying to build tools to actually achieve these goals, you have to really start to think a lot more.
Yeah, I want to add some more questions. So, and in my point of view, I think it's pretty interesting to look at the problem from a hardware aspect because, well, now as far as my knowledge is that now blockchain is the bottom layer of the self-serving identities right now. That means the identifiers, well, it could be anchored in the Facebook, Google, GitHub, those centralized servers. But now they can be anchored on blockchain as well. But at a point, that people is going to use hardware as their interacting device someday, because right now we're still using the hardware that they're manufacturing, right? Like Android phones, Apple's. So, well, if we cannot really truly control the source of the private key, for example, like as I know that people are there's a movement called open hardware, as I know. So that means, well, we can see through the design blueprints of the IC chips you're using. I think that somehow protects your privacy. I mean, you know exactly what's the hardware that's keeping your private keys, right? So so I'm pretty curious about what's the plan of HTCs. How are you gonna solve this problem? Like, how are you gonna make people believe that you're actually using something we can believe?
Sure. So we have a secure enclave, right? The secure enclave is separate from Android, right? And we have to work with Qualcomm, the chipset company, on this, right? Sure, we claim that these private keys, which is in the trust zone, we can guarantee that it's separate from Android. Now, your question seems to be, okay, but I still have to trust Qualcomm. It's not really us in this case. You have to trust our Qualcomm. You're absolutely right, and I think cutting edge tech, that's where we are right now. This ARM trust zone is as secure as you get. I think there are a lot of conspiracy theorists that Qualcomm maybe have a backdoor to the private keys. Maybe, maybe not. But yes, that's the first step towards owning your private keys. We are looking into what you call open source hardware, which is chipsets that are based on RISC-V, which is a Berkeley open source hardware solution. There are open source software on top of this open source hardware system that are being written as we speak. And so that's the next step, right? But you gotta start somewhere. And right now we're as close to ownership as possible, given the limits of where technology is right now. So, did I answer your question?
Another question from the audience.
Hi, so I have a question on the cost proposal and sort of getting around the property monopoly. So, in sort of speaking with various stakeholders and so on, specifically people who already have a property, like a monopoly on property, what's sort of been their reaction in terms of implementing something like cost? And specifically in sort of the making it non-cursive, so actually people who already have a monopoly, them wanting to switch to something like cost. So what are your experiences around that, just practically, as well as any ideas of how to make it non-cursive?
My presentation is going to touch on some things that we see in the digital asset context. Yeah, and on my presentation, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to touch on that.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? 还有问题吗？那我们先一个10分钟的 break， 然后我就 set up presentation. Oh, okay. All right.
I guess to speak more to your background, Jennifer, and art and things. I know we talk a lot about technology here, a lot of engineers here. Like, what role do you see art and things playing to get these ideas out there and maybe, in a way, test some of these ideas?
So we have, me personally, I'm working on some narrative stories of some preferable worlds. Like, they're not utopias. We don't think that it's going to be perfect. I think the human experience is already too complicated to say that we'll ever be satisfied with how things are anyway. So through storytelling, we think that we could try and at least imagine what it could be like. Because often when we talk about this, we see some of the questions, we get stuck in the problems now, which prevent us from even imagining how it could be. Also, we've had a lot of dystopic scenarios, we've had worst-case scenarios, and we've had just a lot of absurd humor, satire, and it's not really getting us anywhere. If anything, it seems to be getting us faster to the problem that was stated. So I think, and I think everybody in this community on that side, also think that it's about time we have some preferable visions of the world. And then also we don't look at it just as window dressing. It's not about illustrating the ideas only. Like that's a part of it. And one way that we work is not just with words, but with visualizations, with games, with interactive experiences. But it's a way of thinking. And actually, it's probably the one that can lead the most because we're not held back by anything. We're not held back by technology. We're not held back by a company that we work for. We're not held back by needing to like gather a lot of people. So that's in some way the most important job that we have is to just try and engage everybody and make it accessible to people that don't understand the ideas of what it could be like if they don't have a technological background or an academic background. So does that answer the question?
So I have one last question for you. If anyone from the crowd want to set up a chapter or like a meetup, how do they contact and what's the next upcoming big events?
Sorry, I didn't include that. So if you want to start a chapter or if you want to find one, we are building a directory so that you can see where they all are. In the meantime, get in touch with, just write to info@radicalxchange.org or Emmanuel, EMMANEUL, I think. Emmanuel at RadicalxChange.org. He's the community organizer. And then for the next conference, we're thinking South America. We haven't decided yet on which country and state, city, but we'll be announcing that very soon. But it will probably be not in March, but April, May.
Thanks very much. Please, what do you think? I think we can have 10 minutes break and then that was help set up for the presentation. That is how it's going to be. Yeah. 10分钟休息一下，然后我们先把比赛。
Probably find out. Okay. Okay.
还有声音吗？好，大家那个因为我们这边场地的时间有限，就是场地只有到9:30，对，所以大家先回座，我们准备开始。因为Meetup的简报大概30分钟，所以我们这边因为等一下就是9:30左右就要撤了，所以我们现在就即将开始，那大家先就是可以先回座。Because our place is good until 9:30, so I think we can start right away. So yeah, good until. So everybody can go back to the seats, or if you want to leave, you can leave now. Because I see somebody wants to leave. 以吗？可以吗？那大家先 attention 在这边下。好，好，那我们就立刻开始哦，可以吗？好，那我们就用掌声欢迎林小李。
So what I wanted to talk about today is, first of all, talk about what hamburger taxes are and why hamburger taxes are interesting in general, but also go through some other mechanisms that are similar to hamburger taxes, but slightly different, and specifically zero in on some particular use cases, including EMS domain names and a couple of other ones that are particularly interesting and which we've already started talking about some of these ideas. So, yes, how do I next slide? Okay, so like this thing doesn't work, right? Okay. So, like the kind of hamburger taxes and quadratic voting and quadratic funding, which I consider to be a kind of close cousin of quadratic voting, are probably the two big members of Glenn's radical mechanism design family that people know about. And people generally tend to really love quadratic voting and especially quadratic funding. So just to give a kind of quick introduction to what quadratic funding does, the basic idea is that with quadratic voting, for example, right, you have people can vote on things, and you have these voting tokens, and you can vote, and you can spend more tokens quadratically getting more votes. But the mechanism is still kind of limited because someone still has to figure out what it is that people are voting on. And if you control that lever, you can actually control a huge amount of power of the mechanism. Whereas quadratic funding is much more generic. The setup basically says, we are going to just generally try to fund public goods. What is a public good? A public good is any project that just benefits a lot of people and benefits this large group of people where you can't kind of control on a fine-grained level who it does benefit and who it doesn't benefit. Right? If I write a blog post about zero-knowledge proofs, a lot of people read it. I can't really stop people from reading it. And so one of the challenges with public goods is that they tend to be chronically underfunded, right? And the reason is that these are projects that benefit a huge number of people, but when any single person is making a decision, do they or do they not contribute to some public good, they're not going to take into account the benefit that this project has to all of these other people they never heard of, never will hear of, and never will come into contact with. So quadratic funding, basically, the setup is that you have some set of projects, and theoretically anyone can spin up a project, and people can donate money to projects through this mechanism. And if a project gets contributions from multiple people, then the idea is, right, that the mechanism recognizes that if person A and person B both donated to some project, then that means that this is a project which is valuable to person A and valuable to person B. But person A by themselves would not have taken into account the benefit to person B, and person B would not have taken into account the benefit to person A. And so you can actually calculate, like, what is this kind of amount that people would not take into account by themselves when making decisions, and you can basically subsidize it, right? So person A contributes to the public good and is doing a good thing for person B, and person B is doing a good thing for person A. So let's take some pool of money and just subsidize this wonderful thing that's going on with these two people helping each other. And if you have a project where lots of people are donating money to it, then for each pair of those people, you can do that calculation separately, add it all up. And for public goods that benefit a large number of people, you can basically have a large number of subsidies going to them. For things that aren't genuine public goods and only benefit a few people, the mechanism would automatically subsidize them less, right? So it's this kind of weird, kind of democratic, kind of market-based way of just emergently figuring out what the public goods are and distributing them to them. So quadratic funding is really interesting, but quadratic funding requires this external source of money, right? So like in this chart, if you have 4 people, then these are 4 kind of squares are those 4 people's contributions. This yellow square is this kind of extra money that, according to the formula, the project should get, but this extra money has to come from somewhere. And so if you're going to have mechanisms that just magically give people more money for doing things that are good for each other, then that money has to have a source. And so you need to have, for there to be money going to things that are public goods, there needs to be some place that that money is coming from. So this is basically, we need to pay for stuff, right? People don't like paying for stuff, but paying for stuff is necessary. Now, often paying for stuff has a kind of secondary economic inefficiencies attached, right? So like, for example, if I wrote a blog post on zero knowledge proofs, and let's say I have no money, and I want to keep writing these blog posts, but nobody's paying me for them themselves, then what I might do is I might put up a paywall. I might just say, you can only see this blog post if you pay me $10. Now, if I do that, then I might get some money, and I might be able to live, which is good. But on the other hand, what it also means is that anyone who is not willing to pay $10, anyone who is willing to pay between $0 and $10, does not get to see the blog post. So that's a loss to them, and they're not paying me money. So that loss to them does not come with a corresponding benefit to me. So economists generally call this a deadweight loss. It's a kind of pure inefficiency, a pure unfortunate drag on the economy that means that just charging $10 for these blog posts would kind of cost, right? And like any time anyone charges money to download a book or watch a movie, you have deadweight losses. We have deadweight losses everywhere. Now, it turns out, though, that we can have mechanisms that raise money, but which raise money in ways that increase efficiency, right? So there's this kind of holy grail, and this is kind of Glenn's picture of what an ideal kind of economy would look like, right? Glenn has this wonderful phrase that says, tax the congestible and subsidize the increasing returns. So the idea here basically is that if there is some activity that where basically people are kind of fighting over some limited resource, and if one person has something, that means that other people don't have something, and so people are kind of crammed fighting for something, then that's something that should be taxed, right? So if one example of this is that a lot of cities are starting to experiment with charging drivers on roads for driving in places and during hours where there's lots of congestion. Another example is just charging for things that have limited space in general. And then even something like RadicalxChange, for example, it's got a website, produces a lot of free content, also has a conference. Conferences have limited space, and so you charge money for the conference, use that as a source of revenue, and you get this money, and this revenue kind of comes in a way that ideally is efficiency increasing. But at the same time, you take that money and you use it to subsidize activity that helps others for free, right? So in the case of RadicalxChange itself, this would just be content that gets published through the internet so that anyone can see it. And so this kind of really nice thing that you would want to do is basically kind of charge money on one side, because money has to come from somewhere in the real world, and take this money and use it for things like quadratic funding to kind of support public goods, support kind of things that are useful but don't pay for themselves in general, and so you kind of increase efficiency on both sides. Right, so this is the holy grail. And it turns out that sometimes we can't actually get it. So the monopoly problem, right? So this is this kind of problem that Glenn talks about in the first chapter of Radical Markets, which basically says, suppose I have an apple, and I value this apple at $2. Right? So I have an apple, and theoretically, if someone pays me more than $2, I'm willing to give them an apple. Now let's say you are feeling hungry, and you're hungrier than me, and you want the apple, and you're willing to pay up to $3 for the apple, right? So theoretically, there's an opportunity here for a mutually beneficial transaction. Theoretically, right, if I sell you the apple for $2.50, then I'm happy I got enough money and even more money than I wanted. You're happy because you got the apple and you got the apple for even less money than you were willing to pay. So it would be nice if a transaction could happen. But there's a problem, right? So if I have the apple and I have no idea whether you value this apple at $3 or $5 or $50, and I have to choose, well, what price do I sell you this apple at? And I could say I'm selling it at 2.01. And then if you want if you value the apple more than I do, then you're definitely going to be willing to pay 2.01. But if I sell it at 2.01, then I'm basically not making a profit. I'm selling it at just the lowest possible price I'm willing to sell it at, and it's not really in my interest to do that, right? It's in my interest to try to be greedy and ask for more. I might try a price of 2.5, I might try a price of 4, but the problem is that as I get greedier and I try to increase the profit that I get, well, there's a chance that I misjudge how much you actually want this apple, and there's a chance that you're just going to reject the transaction. Now, there's a theorem by M. Myerson and Satterthwaite in 1982 that basically says there's actually no kind of efficient way to make this transaction happen in a pure private market, right? So there's no algorithm that two parties just between themselves can use to actually figure out, should we have a sale and what would the fair price for a sale be, without there being a risk that one person misjudges the other person and the transaction fails to happen, even though the transaction would have been good for everyone. So, monopoly problem, it's everywhere, and this is something that in an information age is also a serious issue because the marginal cost of a lot of things is zero, right? Like even just anything like paying for a book, paying for a movie, or any of these things, right? The actual cost of sending someone a file is pretty close to zero, but then if you actually charge zero, you're not getting enough money to recoup the cost, and so, but that's only one very extreme example, right? Like really, any time you have property which is not very liquid, so any kind of property where different items are different from each other, you're going to have monopoly problems to some extent, and this is going to create a drag on the economy to some extent, right? And we'll talk about this in the context of domain names as well. One kind of extreme example that sometimes gets used to motivate harbor tax is this idea that, let's say you're Elon Musk, and there's a bunch of farms, and he wants to buy this strip of 10,000 farms because he wants to make a hyperloop. Let's say this hyperloop would be really nice and it would benefit a lot of people, but the problem is that the train has to go somewhere, and the train goes really, really fast, so it has to go in a straight line. And so let's say you start buying up all of these farms. Now you buy up 8,000 of these 10,000 farms. The other 2,000 people now know this. Hey, Elon really has to buy that farm. Elon pretty much has no choice but to buy that farm. So what are the other 2,000 people going to do? Push up their prices by a factor of 10. What's the last person going to do? Push up his price by a factor of 5,000. And so basically, there's no way this transaction is going to happen, right? And so things like this are one reason why eminent domain historically tends to exist. But this is just one example of how monopoly problems can get even worse when you have 10,000 separate monopolists over 10,000 items, each of which someone needs to buy for some purpose. So, harbor taxes. Yay, this guy. Let's see. So basically, the idea behind the harbor tax is it's this kind of alternative property system, and the rule that it sets up is it says for any asset which is covered by a harburger tax, the owner of that asset needs to specify a price at which they're willing to sell the asset. So if you have something that's subject to harburger tax, like you would just go on some website and you would log in and you would say, this is the price that I think this thing is worth. The owner has to pay a percentage of that, so for example, 1% every year. And if they specify this price, then they have to be willing to sell the asset to anyone at any price. So if I go on this website and I specify, hey, I think this farm is worth $1 million, then anyone else can go on the website and they can click and buy the thing for $1 million. If I try to avoid paying the tax and I say my farm is worth $1,000, well, anyone can go and see it. Hey, there's a farm and it's cost $1,000. Click, yay, I got a farm. So the goal here basically is to try to do two things, right? One of them is to try to be a property tax without needing some kind of third party that can figure out what all these prices are. But the second thing is that it also kind of counteracts the monopoly effect, right? So if I have some item that's taxed, then basically, if a harburger tax didn't exist, there is some price at which I would be willing to sell it. But the problem is, right, that there is this monopoly tax that basically says, I actually want them, it's in my interest to make the price at which I offer to sell be higher than the price I'm really willing to sell at to try to get the profit in there. And harburger taxes create an incentive to push that down, right, because they're kind of directly a tax on not being, like, having a high price at which you sell things. So, this is something that you could think of as applying to farms so that it becomes easier to buy 10,000 of them in a strip, but there is also, like, in the short term, right, we don't have the ability to, like, rewrite laws of entire countries and convince people that who have in, like, their farms that this is a good idea. And so I want to focus on virtual property because virtual things are just nicer and easier to experiment with in the short term. And often there's a community of enthusiasts that like having weird economic experiments run on them because they opted into a weird economic experiment run by possibly Japanese, possibly Australian guy 10 years ago already. So ENS domains, right? So background here is that ENS, the Ethereum name system, is this kind of DNS-like domain name system. So in the DNS, I have Vitalik.ca, the Ethereum Foundation has Ethereum.org, other people have their own domains. With ENS, I have Vitalik.eth, right? And anyone can get any domain.eth by registering it through the ENS contract. So it's this DNS-like domain system that's set up on the Ethereum blockchain, and it's intended for use within the Ethereum ecosystem. So the way that these names were allocated initially is basically a second price auction, right? So it's a scheme where anyone can, if they want to bid, they would start an auction, and then they would publish a bid, and within a week, anyone else can publish a bid, and whoever bid the highest amount wins, but they only have to pay the same amount that the second highest bidder bid, and there's some economic logic for why this is kind of efficient. And what I mean by efficient is basically if the item is guaranteed to go to the person who values it the most. And if once you bid this got a domain, you have it. So now what it's moving towards is basically a fixed annual fee. Right? And so in both cases, ownership of a domain is either kind of permanent or close to permanent. Now, you have a right to transfer a domain voluntarily, but if you have a property system consisting of many unique items, where each of which can only be transferred voluntarily, then as we saw, we have these monopoly problems, right? And so, here's some of the problems that this kind of scheme faces. So first of all, right now there's this fixed annual fee, which is about $5 a year. Often, that annual fee is actually kind of too high for economic to be economically efficient, right? So if, for example, I'm okay with having a 12-letter domain name that contains like weird letters, I don't know, like Q's and V's, and it's like a Chinese character, one simplified, one traditional, and two others, then like nobody's really, and I'm happy with having that domain, then there's nobody who's really competing with me. And if I want to register that domain for my pet ant, that's A-N-T, not A-U-N-T, then I might not be willing to pay $5 a year. I might be willing to pay 5 cents a year, right? So, but the system forces everyone to pay $5 a year, even though there's no economic reason why I would need to pay $5 a year. Like, I'm claiming a domain nobody wants. Like, it's this weird 12-character thing only I care about. Why should I have to pay more than a blockchain transaction? So there's this economic efficiency on one side. Now, on the other side, the fees are often too low, right? So, for example, if you want to register something like, I don't know, Libra.eth, and let's say somebody gets lucky and they just grab it really quickly, then they're going to try to sell it to Libra for an extremely high price. And Libra might accept that price. And then this person who was just lucky enough to get a transaction at first might get $20,000. Or they might overestimate how much Libra actually values the domain, and they might think, oh, that's this big company, they're going to be willing to pay $1 million, so we'll charge $1 million, but actually they only value it at 10,000, and like even though there was an opportunity for a transaction to happen, like, the domain just ends up sitting in the hands of this squatter forever, benefiting nobody. So there's a problem if the fees are too high, and there's a problem if the fees are too low, and any kind of regime that just kind of centrally plans a fixed fee is going to have both of these problems. And I claim ENS does have both of these problems. A third problem, and this is less about efficiency and more about another objective that I think is kind of dear to the hearts of RadicalxChange people, which is egalitarianism. And the problem here basically is that this mechanism is not only inefficient, but it also unfairly privileges people that exist at the very beginning of the scheme over people that will exist 20 years from now. And honestly, this is a problem the entire cryptocurrency community has. Like, you go on Twitter, right, and you see these Bitcoin maximalists that they go around saying, unlike the US dollar, and unlike gold, Bitcoin is fair. Dude, half the freaking coins were mined before anyone even heard of the thing. So, like, these systems are just often end up systematically being set up just because people have short planning horizons and often without even any real intent, in such a way that they are kind of very favorable to people within the first 6 months, within the first year, maybe 2 years, but after 20 years, like, there's no stuff left to claim. And so people 20 years later are going to think, or even 4 years later, are going to think this thing is unfair, and they're not going to want to participate, and potentially they're going to want to compete with them. So arguably, this is part of why Namecoin hasn't really gone anywhere, for example. Right? Namecoin is the original blockchain-based DNS, but now, like, no one cares about it. Why? Because all the domains got bought up really cheaply. So, like, these are all challenges with the way domains work right now, right? So, how do we fix this? So one natural option is to just stick a harbinger tax on it. So if you have a domain, then you just have to specify a price, and you just basically send the transaction into the smart contract on Ethereum, and you just say, this is the price I'm willing to pay, and you have to pay, say, maybe 3% of that every year. And if you want to, at any time, you can send the transaction that changes your price, and then that changes the fee that you have to pay. But whatever price you send, anyone else can send the transaction into the system, and they can buy it from you at that price. So this is like the simplest possible way to apply harbinger tax to the scheme, right? And if we want to make it a bit or considerably nicer to people, then we can add a 3-month waiting period, right? But you don't want to just be able to buy the Vitalik.eth and then announce a Binance giveaway 1 minute later to collect $5 million in the scam. So it's like, with a 3-month waiting period, then maybe if you buy the Zelda.eth, I might have some time within which to tell people, hey, this thing doesn't represent me anymore, go to ethereum.eth instead. So this is one way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it, right? So problems here is that, like, here's some of the concerns that you hear about hardware taxes in practice. So one of them is basically that, like, owners are generally not good at making this continuing to make this calculation of, like, how much is this thing actually worth to me. Like, even if you try to hardware tax farms, right? Like, sure, at this specific time that you buy or sell a farm, you have to try to figure out what price you sell it for, but like, people aren't used to kind of publishing, figuring out for themselves updated numbers of how much their farm is worth every month. So that's one challenge, right? Like, and with domains, it's even worse. So, like, well, let's do a poll. Anyone here want to try and figure out how much should I set if Vitalik.eth got hardware tax? What price should I set for it? Show it. More than 10 even. Okay. Answer over here. How much should I do? Okay. Okay. Yeah. You want to? Okay. 2,000. Any answers here? Okay, so I see are more than 10, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. Any other numbers? Yes?
Not a number, but I think it depends on the transition period.
3 months. How much in 3 months?
I'd say probably about 100
Okay, so we're clearly kind of differing by at least 2.7 orders of magnitude here. I mean, shell weights at least 10, so take that out, 1.7 orders of magnitude, factor of 50. So, like, people aren't good at valuing things, but what they are better at is seeing a number and deciding, do I accept this number or do I reject this number, right? Because that's just something you do every day. I mean, who here has paid for something today? Who here has, within the last week, decided not to pay for something because we thought the price is too high? Okay, so this is like a behavior that we're used to and that we can try to work around, right? So this is one of the problems, right? That hardware taxes kind of push upon owners this sort of new behavior that they're not used to. And like, realistically, right, like, the mechanisms don't just need to be kind of efficient and fair in a mathematical sense. They also need to be reasonable to people that are ultimately going to be dealing with these mechanisms. And so there is this demand for them to be fairly simple. So here's option 2. So option 2 is we're going to kind of flip the hardware tax on its head, and we're going to have this kind of auction set annual fee mechanism. So basically, for every domain, there is an associated bidding contract. In that bidding contract, anyone can place bids. So if for Vitalik.eth, there would just be a bidding contract, and anyone here could just come up and place a bid, and they say, I'm willing to buy this for 5 ETH, I'm willing to buy this for 10 ETH, 50 ETH, 100 ETH, 0.01 ETH. But if you place a bid, you have to actually send the ETH along with the bid, and I have the ability to claim it. So bidding on a domain requires actually sending the money and actually being willing to pay, but until I claim a bid, you always have a right to withdraw it at any time. Now, the way the tax works now is that the owner gets charged an annual fee based on the highest bid. So whatever the bid that anyone sends, whatever the highest amount is, you take that amount and multiply it by 3%, and I mean, it could be even a different number, it could be 5%, it could be 8%, and I would have to pay that amount every year. So the mechanism here is still kind of, it feels similar, right? It still feels like you're using a market mechanism to figure out the price, and whatever the price is, you're charging 3% of that or whatever percentage of that every year. But the mechanism has some different properties, right? So here, instead of a sale being owner sets the price and buyer initiates, here buyer sets the price and owner initiates. So it's a different dynamic. Now, the dynamic does have some different properties. So, for example, one problem is that even though it does kind of feel nicer to owners, and it does feel like owners kind of have somewhat more ownership and more control than they would in the Harburger tax, but it also solves monopoly problems less effectively, right? So, for example, if I was starting a new project, and since astrological signs seem to be a trend, you got Gemini, you got Libra, I'm going to start a new blockchain, I'm going to call it Capricorn, and I'm going to get Capricorn.eth. So I noticed someone has Capricorn.eth. So I'm just going to go ahead and bid $20,000 on it. And the guy's going to be like, whoa, I just wanted Capricorn.eth for a high school science project I don't care about. And now somebody wants it for $20,000. Well, there's no way I'm paying a $600 annual fee for it, so I'll just sell it to the guy. And yay, I make $20,000. And so, okay, I got Capricorn.eth. But now, let's say there's some domain squatter, right? Some evil guy who wants to make a profit here. Well, if I have Capricorn.eth, then chances are I'm also going to want every misspelling of Capricorn. I'm going to want Capricorn and Capricorn and Cape Town Corn and Cape Corn Cob. And so you might potentially decide to just quickly buy up all of those domains and charge high prices for them, knowing that I'll have to pay up. So within this scheme, it's still harder to do this than it is under a kind of standard ownership regime, because if you charge high prices, then I can bid those high amounts and you have to pay 3% a year on those high amounts. But it's still less effective than a traditional Harburger tax, because in a traditional Harburger tax, I can just decide at the beginning, I want Capricorn.eth and I want all of these misspellings, then I can just buy everything at the same time, right? So it's a different set of trade-offs. Now, if you want to make the scheme kind of even nicer to owners and even more like traditional ownership, you could cap the rate at which fees can change. You could even cap the fees. So you could say, well, we're going to charge a maximum fee of $100 a year. And so if you do this, right, then it becomes more difficult to object to the scheme, because it's like, hey, all we're doing here is we're just charging a fee between $0 and $100 a year, and DNS already charges fees between $0 and $100 a year. All we're doing here is we're just using this economic mechanism to figure out, like, what are the domains that there actually is high demand for, and those are the ones that we'll charge higher fees for. And if I make some stupid domain with 12 characters, including one simplified into traditional Chinese characters, then that's not something I'd have to pay for because nobody wants it. But if I get Libra.eth, then I'll have to pay $100 a year for it because lots of other people want it. So basically, there's a lot of room to make these different compromises between kind of Harburger tax mechanisms and full ownership, and we really have this entire space to explore if you're all uncomfortable at the beginning. So things other than domain names. Now, virtual property in general, right? So we can think about using Harburger taxes for domain names. There's this thread on the ENS forum. If you go to discuss.ens.domains, there's this entire thread where I kind of bring up some of these mechanisms and I go around and go arguing with people. So you're very welcome to go and read that. No paywall, don't have to pay for public good. But we can talk about things other than domains too. So let's talk about advertising space, for example. So advertising, potentially a good way to fund user-facing software, and it's got problems, but it's also like right now, we don't have any of these fancy quadratic funding gadgets. So if you're going to build something that has a lot of users, you might just get advertising. You might get, and if you have an ad and you have a lot of users, then you get money. So with advertising space, there's the question like, how do you allocate it, right? So I talked about harbor taxes. Advertising space is kind of like digital property. Should we use harbor taxes to allocate digital property? Does anyone want to pay $1,000 Taiwan dollars to grab this advertising space? No, you can't. The price is actually a million times higher than not paying harbor taxes on it. So, well, you could just use auctions, right? So you could just say, well, I have this application, and over here I have this advertising space, and every day I'm just going to have a dumb second price auction and just sell the space for the next day. So what's the problem with just auctioning it? Why would you want to use a harbor tax instead of using auctions? So harbor taxes, kind of philosophically speaking, right, are designed as this kind of compromise between allocative efficiency and investment. So allocative efficiency basically means items go to whoever values them most. So items don't get kind of controlled by these squatters that try to sell these people at high prices, and if people aren't willing to pay prices, they just sit there and do nothing. Items actually go to whoever values them and whoever could do the most good with them. So this is allocative efficiency. Investment efficiency basically says, well, we want to preserve people's ability to make long-term projects, build long-term brands, build long-term businesses, and kind of save for the future and actually have the incentive to do these things. So you have to compromise between these. And another one I would probably add in here is also fairness. Right? So domain names need investment efficiency. And the reason domain names need investment efficiency is because making a project, making a brand, making anything with a specific name is an investment in that name. So if I start a project and I call it Capricorn and I get Capricorn.eth, I'm kind of putting a lot of energy into the name Capricorn. And if you're suddenly going to come to me and say, oh, hey, too bad, you have to rename it Cancer, then I'm not going to be happy. You know, it's not trivial to just take a project called Capricorn and rename it to Cancer. So domain names need investment efficiency, but to ads need investment efficiency. Now, often the answer is no, right? Often, like, you don't really care about having an ad for a long time, and if you have an ad, if you thought you were going to have an ad for 4 weeks, but you actually get cut off after 1 week, well, you're not going to cry that much if you get 3/4 of your money back. But there are potentially cases where there is an investment interest in ads, and that's basically if you start sorting by keyword, right? So if you say buy advertising space associated with people that search for a particular keyword, and that keyword is your name, then that might be something that you put more of your investment in, and that might be something where harbor taxes make more sense. So where not to use harbor taxes in a quick summary. One is places where property is fungible, you don't have any monopoly issues. So, for example, there's like no real point in harbor taxing coins. In other cases where you don't need any investment efficiency, so if you're just selling, like even transaction space in a blockchain, like there's no real investment. There's generally no real investment efficiency in that. Another case where you don't want harbor taxes is where less than perfect ownership stability is too risky, right? So in the case of domain names, there's people's own desire to have a stable name, but there's also this public interest where if people can just randomly grab other people's names, well, you might put scams there. And so there isn't just a private interest in ownership stability, there's also a public interest in ownership stability. And if that public interest is too high, then maybe harbor taxes aren't the right choice. So where to use harbor taxes? Potentially there's these really kind of interesting and weird options to look at, right? So one of them is just digital assets and games and virtual worlds in general. So I have a magical sword. Well, too bad. I have to pay 3% of your harbor tax on the magical sword. Even like virtual land, there's Ethereum-based projects that I know that are doing virtual lands that are trying to harbor tax it. So I think that's really interesting. Positions in caches. So this is an interesting one. So especially blockchain protocols that are more complicated and that have like some kind of sharding, that have like some kinds of optimization, then you start getting to the point where like different resources can have different positions and people can put resources in different positions that make it more efficient to access one thing at the same time as another thing. And basically, if your protocol starts getting that kind of complexity to the point where it starts becoming really heterogeneous and you start getting like specific positions that become valuable, then harbor taxes maybe start making sense. Future block space and blockchains. So if you want to make a blockchain protocol that has the ability to purchase the rights to include transactions 5 days in the future ahead of time, that might be something that harbor taxes make sense for too. Yes?
Can we use harbor tax on space data?
I would argue state data is probably not the best target for harbor taxes because it's fungible, right? Because like the state is just this big 1 gigabyte thing, and data is data, and there really isn't really any difference between kind of different pieces of data. Well, that's not quite true. Like if you start actually caring about like lengths of local branches, then maybe, but like a simple approximation says no, right? So like basically harbor taxes start making more sense once resources become more complicated and more heterogeneous, and you start caring about like this specific position is worth more than this other specific position. But if you don't have that property, you have just these options. So and then outside of the blockchain space, like one of the examples Glenn really likes is spectrum auctions. So basically like auctioning off the rights to use some particular electromagnetic spectrum for some kind of wireless communication. So that's something where there is an ownership interest because you need to build equipment, you need to get devices out, but you don't want, there's a lot of monopoly power issues as well, so you have to compromise between the two of those things. So there are definitely areas like that. Intellectual property is something that could be interesting to harbor tax kind of in the real world. But like if you're just like if you don't have the ability to change the policy of a government, then virtual worlds and kind of blockchain worlds where people are already used to living in a crazy experiment made by a possibly Japanese, possibly Australian guy are also a kind of place to just start trying ideas and like seeing if you can get them adopted. So that's harbor taxes for you.
So we're gonna do a Q&A session right now. Any questions? 有吗？有问题吗？我们现在就进行问答。常文老师有吗？没问题。好。
Hi. Do you think what's the problem why not so many people use harbor tax in the real world? What's the problem?
I think first of all, like harbor taxes are something that people haven't had too much time to think about. Like they have appeared a couple of times, like the version that. Yeah, I mean, like, so like, for example, the version that, at least in my understanding, that's what Chih-Cheng tried to do, like, where it's a more limited thing, where basically only the government could buy the land, and that ended up failing because the governments just, like, started not, like, generally just didn't really take the option to buy the land, so people started, like, valuing everything at really low prices. So, like, for harbor taxes to work, you do need this kind of adversarial element where you have different parties being able to buy the resources. But in general, it has been this kind of about. And thanks to radical markets, there's been a lot more interest in them recently, but there are also these kind of genuine usability issues with them. Like people aren't kind of psychologically used to dealing with this form of partial ownership that says, well, you kind of own this thing, but you have to put a number and you want to grab it from you if they pay that number. So I think there's also this kind of user interface concern that hasn't been quite addressed yet, but the main things are, I think, that's the other places I need to start experimenting. Yes.
How far do you think we are from how we get taxes on crypto to fund quadratic funding?
So to fund quadratic funding, like it kind of like something like a blockchain treasury that would use quadratic funding to fund public goods. I think it's not clear that quadratic. So harbinger taxes on cryptocurrency itself are probably not the best idea because like cryptocurrency is fungible, and so what's going to happen is it's just going to be a complicated thing where everyone will just have to get an API to just keep on setting their value to be the market price, and so it basically collapses into just having issuance, and having issuance to fund the treasury is something that blockchain projects have already. But I definitely think that quadratic funding is a good candidate for like how to actually, given a piece of revenue, where to actually put it. And there is a project called Bitcoin which is experimenting with quadratic funding on a small scale right now. So I'm personally very excited to see how that experiment goes. Hopefully it goes well.
So it's just on top of my head, but have you thought anything about like is that relevance with the market for lemons and information asymmetry?
The market for what?
Market for lemons, so like used cars kind of thing, where the seller's incentive. So it's just some relevance there maybe.
Okay, so that's actually a great question because one of the benefits of harbinger taxes is they actually can potentially counteract lemon effects. So the idea here basically is that, like, let's say you have a house or a farm, because we're harbinger taxing farms now, and you want to sell the farm. Then you have an incentive to do things that make the farm look good, even if they don't actually correspond to the farm having more value, right? So you have incentives to like try really hard to plant trees to make it look healthy, even though that's not corresponding to any actual value. And these are things that exist in the real world already, right? If you have an item, you always have an incentive to kind of polish it and make it look better and kind of deceive the buyer to some extent. What harbinger taxes do is basically, if you do that, then more people will want your thing, and so you'll have to pay more tax on it. And so they basically create a negative incentive that basically drives you to kind of make your thing look worse. Now, if the harbinger tax rate is set too high, then everyone has an incentive to make their thing look as terrible as possible, and you have an inverse one in the market. But like in the real world, you can always set harbinger taxes that are low enough that that's not an issue, and all you're doing is you're kind of partially counteracting and mitigating the existing tendency to try to make your thing look better than it is. Yeah.
I was just curious, has there been kind of concept of fractional ownership of non-fungible goods? So let's say, for example, this farm example, someone wants to buy a farm, but I can't afford $1 million for that, so I'll have it split between that.
Yeah, so in the blockchain space, I know there's a lot of projects that have tried to and wanted to do things like this. I mean, one of the challenges is just figuring out legal structure, another is just figuring out people who want to participate, but a third is governance. Like, okay, we have a farm, we split the farm into 100 tokens, and I and my buddies buy up 55 of those tokens, and we're going to vote, and we're going to say, we don't care what the other 45 people want, we're just going to use the farmland, and we're going to put a golf course on it. And we don't care if the other 45 hate golf courses because we can outvote them. So, like, there's a lot of these kind of inefficiencies in voting mechanisms, and it's not really clear like what fractional voting really represents in that sense. And so I think like mechanisms like harbinger taxes and also mechanisms like quadratic voting, I think are potentially really interesting in trying to come up with fractional ownership concepts that make more sense and give people kind of more meaningful abilities where with them partially owning a farm actually means something that they can do with and where they're sure they're not going to get exploited. I will say that in general, I'm like a big fan of fractional ownership as a concept because, like, if you look at society in general, right, like you have renters that rent houses and they have this weird inverse incentive where they don't want to see their community succeed because if it succeeds, rents go up and they get pushed out. And then you have buyers that have way too much incentive, and so they basically lobby politicians to try to restrict supply as much as possible. So, like, there's incentives screwed up on both ends, and so I'm actually personally really interested in this idea of, like, can we kind of give people something that's in between the two extremes and would that actually be healthier? So if there's blockchain projects that want to do things like that, if there's radical mechanism projects that want to do things like that, I think it's really cool idea.
那我们对，那我们今天谢谢那个创咖啡，就是今天提供场地的Joe，我们给他一个掌声，谢谢，特别感谢。也就是我知道现场也有很多是举办活动的人，那今天是我们第一次使用这个活动，大家觉得场地怎么样？很棒，很棒吗？看起来都还蛮满意的。那就是也欢迎，如果你有举办活动的话，你可以跟Joe或是跟他们来联系这样子。然后呢，我们等一下离场的时候是希望大家把垃圾都带走，这样子可以吗？可以大家配合一下。好，那我们今天谢谢那个理查雷的带来的演讲。之后的活动资讯跟就是简体中文书跟繁体中文明年会出版的时候，我们资讯都是还是在 Twitter 上为主。对，所以你可以追踪我们的 Twitter， 就是 RadicalxChange Taipei。对对，团购是找那个城堡，就是举手这位，黑色衣服这位。繁体中文明年会有出版社出版，那今天谢谢大家。